Hey everybody, this is Sally Hendrick with Shout Your Cause, and I've got Kimberly Charron here from Geek Schooling with me to talk about homeschooling and whatever comes with that, because we're in a situation right now. And so I think we need to be talking about this stuff, especially since we don't really know what's happening in the next month or two. So hey, Kimberly, tell us more about what's going on, and welcome.
Thanks, Sally. Thank you so much for inviting me. I've been talking to a lot of parents and news outlets and everything since the whole pandemic started. When talking to a lot of parents right now, they're concerned. They don't like the not knowing. In a lot of areas, we don't know what the fall is going to look like yet, and the kids don't like being, in the dark, and the parents don't like being in the dark. So a lot of them are just saying, you know what, I'm just going to homeschool so we know what we're doing and we don't have to worry what the state comes up with. And there are some places where what schooling is going to look like seems pretty insane because especially with young children, trying to social distance from the teachers and other kids, it just seems incomprehensible. And also possibly damaging. So because children especially need, the warmth of a caring person and their touch. And so a lot of parents are thinking of homeschooling or have decided to homeschool. And even if they haven't, they might want to enjoy some fun learning at home with their kids.
Exactly. And I guess one of the biggest challenges is that, and I've heard this from several people, it's like, okay, so homeschooling is one thing. Learning at a distance is another. So if your school, for example, allows your kids to go home and then log into a Zoom room or some sort of technology to do a video conference, and then they have a list of assignments that need to be done, that's not really all that much. That's not really comprehensive. Whatever the word I'm trying to say, it's not really covering everything. It's just kind of band-aiding the situation, in that you're just looking at a list of things that need to be done, and that can be very unmotivating for children. They do get stuck in their computers and their phones and their games and in the house, and not really doing all the things that they normally would be able to do at school, where they interact socially with other kids. So what is it that you do from a creative standpoint to make this more enjoyable, and, as you say, delight directed learning, or whatever you call it, something like that, right?
Yeah, a lot of people call it delight directed learning. Some people call it child led learning. I'm a big proponent of that because school, I'm a homeschool coach, but I'm not here to tell people exactly what to do. And I'm not the expert in every child. I'm not the expert in your child. You are. And you know what your child loves and what motivates them. And often that is something geeky, like comic books, like video games, like board games. And all of these are educational. Everything is educational. There's always educational value in all these things. And what's been happening during the pandemic is not homeschooling, it's pandemic schooling. And it's not how homeschoolers homeschool every day. We're not stuck in our homes. A lot of us are out and about 7 days a week, and learning on the go and out there in field trips and everything else. And so this really wasn't, if you were finding yourself pandemic schooling going, ugh, this is terrible, this is drudgery, it doesn't have to be like that. And if you take the reins and decide that you want to go for it and homeschool your child, you can teach them in much more exciting ways, and also look at what they're learning already, and it can count as part of your homeschool day. So if they're playing video games, they can actually be learning. My son learned how to read at 8 years old. He was finally motivated to read because he was playing a Star Wars game that involved a lot of different aliens who couldn't speak English, so he couldn't read the subtitles, and he really wanted to play the game by himself instead of with his mom sitting beside him. So he's motivated, and he learned how to read. And in part, he was helped actually by reading Garfield comics to start reading as well. So
isn't that what we all learn with, are the fun
Mhm.
books? I mean, think about when we go back to our childhood, the way that we're learning is reading the things that we're interested in, not reading the things that we don't like. It's the same thing with when you get older. So how do you handle that? Like if you're doing history lessons or something, what would be something fun or different to get kids interested in the facts or the what happened in the past?
Yeah, and that's where cosplay can come in, because I mean, why not get dressed up? And you can surprise your kids, and they can not know you're doing this. And you can dress up in historical dress and come on out and say, "We're learning about Egypt today." Be, dressed historically in Egyptian garb, or in a Greek chiton if you're teaching the Greeks. And you can really get into it, and they can have fun too. Learning how to make costumes and sew and all that kind of thing if you want to get right into it. I mean, of course, you can just tie a sheet if you're talking about chitons and togas, but you can get right into it and sew. And that's not only home economics, but it could be art. You can count all these things into the buckets of learning that we usually put them in, and you don't have to separate them out. I mean, you could just learn and put it all together, and then when you're writing it down, you can separate out, well, that was home economics, we were making costumes, and that was math because we were
doing patterns
economics of something, or patterns from doing actually patterns.
Sewing, there's a lot of math.
Is also math, exactly. So if you start breaking it down and just look at what your child is doing right now, and think about how it's educational. For instance, if they're playing video games with other people online, they could be having a leadership role. They could be leading raids, telling people what to do, and leading a guild, and that's leadership, and that can be put on into some sort of a course description if they're in high school, or just even something they've been doing if it's elementary school.
That sounds a whole lot more fun than just checking off a list that your teacher sends home or sends over an email to the class to get certain, I don't know, boxes checked for certain types of curriculum. Just to give you an example, this is something that my child got to do with school this past spring. Now, we're in a unique situation in that the school we go to, and this is 11th grade, they go from, I think, maybe 5th or 6th up to senior. And so he was in the 11th grade, and we were dealing with a capstone class. The capstone class is a project that this particular class was doing together. And this is like 6 kids. That's all that's in the entire grade. So 6 kids were supposed to be doing this project together, hands-on, with materials, building some sort of models or something like that. So it was a mixture of the creativity and then whatever, else went into the project. Well, they had to abandon that because everybody went home right around spring break. And then we had another 9 weeks of schooling after that. So instead of doing that project, they had the opportunity to do a podcast episode. And so, granted, it's mostly digital stuff that you're doing with that, but there was an interview that was done with someone in the industry of the particular topic that was done. My child chose graffiti, talking about graffiti, and so of course she interviewed her father because he harvests graffiti off of the railroads. And then there was also another person who has a graffiti podcast, one of the best ones in the world, and he spoke to the class. So he did like one of the lectures to teach like how he runs his podcast. And then there was artwork to go with the podcast episode. There was, there were certain bullet points that had to be done. Audio, there was audio and video, and not audio, video, but audio mixture, with music, and then like a little summary of what was happening, the interview itself, more music, a commercial, those types of things. And so that was actually really fun and made that class something that was enjoyable and very different. And he was able to do it on his own without a lot of parental supervision. And I would think that something that like you do, that you have that creative thought, it would be so cool if you were coaching people to say, look, here's some things that you can do with your child. And all you have to do, I bet, do you ask them like, what's your child's favorite thing to do? How do you do your coaching to pull this out of parents and kids?
Yeah, I do. I encourage, like, what do you keep telling them to stop doing? Because that's usually what their passions are.
What do you keep telling them to stop doing? That's great. That's great.
Because a lot of times we're saying, oh, stop watching anime, stop playing video games, stop with the comic books all over the floor. And they can learn through those things. And in fact, my daughter has been learning Japanese primarily through anime for a few years now. And through some apps as well, because anime got her interested in Japanese culture and Japanese language. And so she pursued on her own books and apps to look it up. And she's got Post-it notes all over her wall of all the Japanese figures that she's learning on her own. And that's completely delight-directed learning. That's completely from her. She's directing it herself. And so I don't need to sit and teach her a language because she's doing it. And a lot of kids are doing that and we don't realize, or we don't realize that they are actually learning while they're doing it. And we can also help them learn by just having discussions about it afterwards. So my kids got us all into anime. We watch anime almost daily now, and it wasn't something we watched before. Growing up, my husband and I didn't watch anime. It wasn't something we were interested in, but our kids got us into it, and the stories are amazing, and the character building, and
they're really deep
artistry of it. Yeah, so we can sit here talking about the themes and the character building and how they made it and everything. This is all learning, and it's fantastic. So you could
probably go back in and find the foreshadowing and everything else. Like really take these concepts that you learn in literature class and apply it to what's happening there, and then have them develop their own characters and own plays and things like that, which is really
exactly.
Yeah.
And I mean, you can take Star Wars as a perfect, especially the original is perfect hero's journey in literature lesson. So you can just take that hero's journey and you can apply it and you can discuss it, and then Star Wars is literature. Star Wars can also be filmmaking. You can discuss all the different kinds of filmmaking. Like from the beginning, it was all little miniatures, and now we have CGI. And you could even go into, here's some basic cartooning, digitally. Like, how does CGI work? Let's play with it a little bit if they want to get into it. And it might be something that they springboard into as a career.
Yeah, exactly. And the careers these days, they're just so different than what we were looking at 20 years ago. Maybe longer for me, coming out of high school and going into college and what have you. And you just don't think about that as being what you're going to do for a living. But you do that in your homeschooling. This could really open up a whole new way of learning more across the mass market as the silver lining of this pandemic that we're experiencing. It's the positive aspect.
Hmm. And I know a lot of people are really enjoying spending more time with their kids.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and they're baking, and that's learning, and they're doing things together, and they're playing, board games together. And oh my gosh, board games are incredibly educational, every single one of them.
Mm-hmm.
So they're enjoying their time as a family, and they don't want that to end. And so that's one of the reasons that they're deciding to homeschool.
Well, imagine this too. Friday night game night, movie night, or whatever it is that you do with your family, that could count as part of your schooling. And
Mhm.
it's not happening between 9 and 5 during the week.
Yeah, and that's what most homeschoolers find out, is that when you're homeschooling, your kids are always learning, and they don't even think of it. They don't want to turn off their brains after school. The whole public school model has them thinking that school has to happen in that box,
Mm-hmm.
has to happen between 8 and 3, or whatever your school day is.
Mm-hmm.
But when they're homeschooling, they have all these aha moments, at the grocery store, and just walking around outside, and just anytime. And you realize that homeschooling or learning happens all the time.
Mm-hmm. I'm wondering, like, what else? I mean, baking obviously can be part of science as well, because that's where a lot of the science projects come from, is stuff that you find in the kitchen mixed with other things, like the Mentos and Coca-Cola
Mhm.
explosions and what have you. And then to make it entertaining. Now, granted, I know there's a lot of controversy going on about TikTok right now, but if somebody wanted to make a TikTok video of the experiments they're doing, that could be really motivating, especially for the child that wants to be putting that type of content out there.
And so, asking your child, what do you like to do, can also help. And what would you like to do more of? And you can direct it too, because I know, a homeschool parent, after listening to one of my talks about geek schooling, he made the living room the TARDIS from Doctor Who, and they had Doctor Who school for a
Yeah.
while. Everything was Doctor Who centered. And these shows, sci-fi especially, deals with so many incredible dilemmas and ethical conversations and historical conversations, and they
Mm-hmm.
give you a great spring point, again, for teaching history. Going back around,
Yeah.
if you want to teach about something in history, you can grab some sci-fi and start there and work
Mm-hmm.
backwards. You can even show Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. And you
I don't
have the
know that, but
introduction.
what do they do in
And you
that?
have the introduction to, they time travel, and they collect all these people across
Okay.
history, and you can talk about, what's accurate and what's not about the character portrayals, and you can use them as a spring point to teach about those characters in history.
Well, it would
And
also be a good lesson in saying, here's what this says, and here's all the bullet points. Now go find the ones that actually happened in history that we know about and do a comparison chart.
mhm,
I mean,
mhm.
that's huge. And that's huge for today, just with the fact that we have news that's so all over the place, and there's interpretation in the media that happens and in social media as well, which causes a lot of confusion. And so when you go back to like the original sources and you line things up, it gives you a great skill for debate and research.
Mhm. Yeah, and you can have your child, write a paper on, what that article got, or what that TV show, that episode got
Mhm.
right about history, and what it got wrong, and what actually happened.
Mhm.
Or you can just have a discussion, and then you know that they understand it. Yeah, and you can have them research on their own. A lot of homeschoolers find, they love college and university, and professors love them because they're used to doing work on their own, research on their own. They're
Mhm.
self-starters. So
Mhm.
all of these skills I'm talking about, encouraging your child to learn on their own and develop these skills, are what's going to help them in post-secondary education.
And you know what's funny about that is that I believe like the Linden Waldorf experience in schools is similar to, that concept of like children being able to do the delight directed learning and the things that they really enjoy. That's the medium that they use to develop knowledge and skills. Um, so I don't know if you guys have any of that. Do you have that in Canada?
So the
Linden.
Waldorf method of
Mhm.
schooling and Waldorf schools, I love a lot of their concepts. Like they have an emphasis on hands-on, so they'll do a lot of hands-on, knitting and things like that. And
Mhm.
we've done a lot of that in our homeschool, and including knitting Harry Potter scarves and that kind of thing, because that's very much feeds into my kids' passions. And my kids are 16 and 21 now, so
Yeah.
um, they're not little anymore. But we've been doing this the whole time. And my daughter used to draw um, ponies from My Little Pony all the time, and then she'd make up ponies. Um, so make up her own ponies, and she'd make us into ponies. So the creativity is wonderful once you let them get going, and that can count as art. So what they like to do can count into each of those learning buckets.
So I'm curious about, like, as far as your kids or other kids that you've seen doing the learning like you are a proponent of, what are they doing as adults now? What's happening with their careers and situations?
Oh, anything, kids who homeschool can easily go on to go into post-secondary education, college, university. So sometimes they end up in creative pursuits. My son's been working in the film industry.
Hmm.
Sometimes they end up, being teachers, doctors, whatever.
Yeah,
Uh,
whatever.
but it widely varies. It depends on the child. Every child is different.
Hmm.
And sometimes we think they're going into something else, and all of a sudden they have I know some homeschoolers who all of a sudden get an interest in becoming a doctor, and so they cram 3-4 years of math that they'll need into a year, and all on their own, boom, because they have that, oh my gosh, you know what, I really want to be a doctor. I finally
Hmm.
know what I wanted to do. And these are kids, a lot of the times who've been completely unschooled. So it's completely delight directed learning with the parents just, encouraging. And they've decided, hey, I've got to, do all this math. So do all this science so I can get ready. And it's all them. But you don't have to, if you're not comfortable with unschooling, you don't have to start that way. You can have more direction. You can be the dad who makes the living room into the TARDIS and says, "Okay, we're going to learn this week." And
Hmm. That's cool. So knowing that you run a business, I run a business, how do you think people are going to be able to handle this and manage this at home? Obviously, there's going to be a little bit of time involved to get prepared to be able to do this. What do you encourage people to do that are, suddenly they're having to work from home? Because as entrepreneurs we already know how to do this and how to kind of work with our kids in that situation. Now I don't know personally about how to work with mine on homeschooling so much, because the school is doing that for us. We happen to have a good situation there. But what about all of these parents who feel like they may end up having to stay home part of this time to make sure their kids are doing what they need to be doing for this homeschooling? Like, how are they going to manage it?
I know parents who have made every possible scenario work. I know parents who have both worked and decided to work opposite shifts, so pursue something that was a night so that one parent is always home, especially if your kids are young. Of course, if they're older, they can be home alone and you don't have to worry about that as much.
Mm-hmm.
But they'll work off the opposite shifts, so it works. Or they'll get grandma to take care of the child during the day, or a friend, or a babysitter, so that they can both work if they both work during the day.
Mm-hmm.
So in that scenario, the child will often work on some schoolwork while they're with whoever is taking care of them during the day. It's still the parents' responsibility. They'll take it up at night or do some work on weekends, or maybe they won't have the child do any schoolwork and they'll just do it nights and weekends. It's
Mm-hmm.
whatever whatever works for their family. And even single parents, if they're not working from home, they often buddy up with other single parents so they can trade off the responsibility of having
Mm-hmm.
kids at any given time, so they have a buddy. So if you want to make it work, you absolutely can, and it doesn't have to be schooling 8 to 3, 9 to 4, whatever.
Right.
It can be evenings, weekends. It can be whatever you want it to look like.
Mm-hmm.
And many homeschoolers, what their day looks like is they're done by lunch, and they only homeschool Monday through Thursday with Friday off. So their kids have a lot of time for all of this wonderful delight-directed learning, and to spend all this time drawing or reading or writing or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
playing games, whatever their passion is, and developing it. And even video games can turn into, a passion to want to create video games yourself, and coding and all that.
You just got to be able to carve out that time when you assess and plan, right? So like if you know what they
And
did.
it doesn't take much time.
Yeah.
It doesn't take much time because, you just, if you're assessing, you just talk about it, or, because assessing doesn't have to be tests. And I'm not a big fan of tests myself, because I think tests are more for the classroom where, you have 30 kids or more,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't know what they know. You haven't had a personal discussion with all 30 of those kids on what you learned this week, so you have to give them a test so you know.
Mm-hmm.
But if you've been sitting there with your kid learning with them, and they've been pointing out things, and you've been discussing, you know what they know. And it can be discussion, it can be essays, they can do a vlog about it.
Yeah. I'm thinking more along assessment as being like assessing what they learned that day and writing it in whatever documentation you need legally to turn in. Do you handle any of that sort of thing for people, or do you just coach on the ways that they can do schooling? Like, tell me a little bit more about how you would work with someone, and where can we find you online?
Yeah, I can absolutely help you put it all together into the records that you need to submit when you're going to put your child wants to enter university or college. So you'll want transcripts and course descriptions and all of that. So I mean, when you're elementary school, it's not really a big deal. You have to obey your state law, so be careful with your state law when it pertains to homeschool. Be careful about that, because homeschool state law and public school state law are two different things. So look specifically at what your homeschool state law requires, and of course, adhere to that. And it can be as simple as just, jotting down, every day, keeping a little, like, one sentence what you did that day, so that when you look at it at the end of the year, oh yeah, this is what we did, so you don't forget anything. But in high school, yeah, you have to keep track of, like I said, course descriptions and your transcript and everything. And I can absolutely help you with all of that. I do that for people, help them get their transcripts together.
Well, cool. So where can we find you online? Oh, sorry, our internet's a little wonky.
You can find me at geekschooling.guide.com. That's
geekschooling.guide.com. Let me type that in the comments over here. geekschooling.guide.com. Make sure I spelled it right.
And I have a freebie for your fans today and
Okay,
who's
cool.
listening. If you go to geekschoolingguide.com/mini-course, you can get a mini course to help you get started on geek schooling and thinking outside the box.
Okay.
Some fun with your kids instead of tearing your hair out that they're not doing all the busy work that the school gave them.
Yeah. Okay. Well, everybody, please go get that geekschoolingguide.com/mini-course. I typed it in the comments of this live chat, and it will be on the show notes when I put this on the podcast. So thank you so much, Kimberly. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us before we finish up?
Just remember that you know your child best. You're your child's first and best teacher, and you can do this, and homeschooling can be fun.
All right. Thank you. I love it. Thank you so much for all your creative ideas.
Thanks so much.
All right.
Sally.
You're welcome. Bye.